Today we're exploring the moment that many believe was the true beginning of Saint Francis's transformation. Not the voice in the chapel, not the renunciation of his wealth, not even his first vision. This was something deeper, something more personal, something that required Francis to confront the one thing he feared most in the world. And what happened when he finally stopped running from that fear didn't just change him, it shattered him. And in that shattering, he became the saint we know today. If you've been following these stories, you know that Francis of Assisi is famous for his love of all creatures, for his radical poverty, for his joy that seemed to overflow no matter what suffering he endured. But before all of that, before the stigmata, before the angels, before the voice of Christ, Francis was afraid, deeply, viscerally afraid, of one thing: lepers. In medieval Italy, leprosy was more than a disease. It was a curse, a sentence, a living death. People with leprosy were forced out of towns and cities. They had to ring bells when they walked so others could avoid them. They lived in colonies outside the walls, forgotten, untouchable, barely considered human. Their bodies decayed slowly. Their skin rotted. Their faces became disfigured. And society treated them as if they were already dead. Francis had grown up in Assisi, surrounded by wealth and beauty. He loved fine clothes, music, laughter, everything that was clean and bright and alive. And lepers represented everything opposite: decay, death, ugliness. The idea of being near them, of touching them, of even looking at them, filled him with a horror he couldn't control. He would go miles out of his way to avoid the leper colonies. If he saw one on the road, he would turn his horse around and ride in the opposite direction, his heart pounding, his stomach turning. This wasn't unusual for his time. Everyone avoided lepers. But for Francis, it was more than social custom. It was personal revulsion. He later admitted that the sight of lepers, even from a distance, made him physically sick. He couldn't bear it, and he hated that he couldn't bear it, because deep down, even before his conversion, Francis knew that his fear was wrong. He knew that Christ had touched lepers. He knew that the gospel called for love, not disgust. But knowing and doing are two different things, and Francis couldn't do it. He was trapped by his fear. This remained true even after he began to change, even after he heard the voice in San Damiano, even after he started rebuilding chapels and giving away his possessions. He could give up wealth. He could embrace poverty. He could sleep on the ground and beg for food. But lepers? That was the one thing he couldn't face. That was the wall he couldn't break through. And he knew it. He knew that until he faced that fear, his conversion was incomplete. He was still holding something back, still protecting himself, still running from the very thing Christ was calling him toward. The moment came on an ordinary day. Francis was riding his horse along a country road outside Assisi. The sun was shining. The air was clear. He was probably praying or thinking or simply enjoying the quiet. And then he heard it. The sound he dreaded most. A bell. Slow. Rhythmic. The warning. A leper was approaching. Francis's first instinct was immediate. Turn around, ride away, get as far from that sound as possible. His hands tightened on the reins, his body tensed. Every part of him wanted to flee. But something stopped him. A voice, not audible this time, but unmistakable. a voice in his heart that said, "If you run now, you will run forever." Francis froze. The bell grew closer. His heart pounded. He could feel the fear rising in his throat like bile. He wanted to be brave. He wanted to be the man who had stripped naked in the town square, who had renounced his father, who had heard the voice of Christ. But in that moment, he wasn't that man. He was just Francesco, terrified, disgusted, desperate to escape. And then, around the bend in the road, the leper appeared. Francis saw him clearly. The rotting skin, the bandages, the hollow eyes, the broken body shuffling forward, bell in hand. Everything in Francis screamed to turn away, to close his eyes, to ride past as quickly as possible. But the voice in his heart spoke again. "This is your moment. Choose." What happened next, Francis himself described as the single most important act of his entire life. He didn't ride away. He didn't close his eyes. Instead, he did something that went against every fibre of his being. He dismounted. His legs shook as his feet touched the ground. The leper stopped walking, surprised. No one approached lepers. No one came closer. Everyone ran. But Francis walked toward him, step by step, each one heavier than the last, each one a battle against the fear that told him to stop, to go back, to protect himself. The smell reached him first. Decay, sickness, death. Francis's stomach turned. His hands trembled. But he kept walking. The leper stared at him, confused, maybe even afraid himself. What was this well-dressed young man doing? Francis stopped directly in front of the leper. They were face to face now, close enough to touch. And that's when Francis made his choice. He reached out his hand, not tentatively, not with hesitation, but deliberately. He reached out and took the leper's diseased hand in his own, the hand that was rotting, the hand that everyone else refused to touch, the hand that represented everything Francis feared most. He held it. And then he did something even more extraordinary. He bent down and kissed it. He pressed his lips to the decaying flesh. He kissed the wound. He kissed the sickness. He kissed the fear itself. And in that moment, everything changed. Not for the leper, though that mattered too, but for Francis. Something inside him broke open. The wall that had separated him from complete surrender to God shattered. The last piece of his old self, the part that was still clinging to comfort and safety and self-protection, died right there on that dusty road. Francis later wrote about this moment in his Testament, the spiritual document he composed near the end of his life. He said, "What seemed bitter to me was changed into sweetness of soul and body." Those words don't capture the half of it. In that instant, when Francis kissed the leper's hand, the disgust he had felt disappeared. Not gradually, not over time, instantly. It was replaced by something he had never experienced before. Love. Pure, unfiltered, overwhelming love. Not for the disease, but for the person, for the human being standing in front of him, for the image of God hidden beneath the decay. The leper began to weep. No one had touched him in years. No one had looked at him as a person. No one had treated him with dignity. And here was this young man, holding his hand, kissing it, looking into his eyes with tenderness. Francis embraced him. He held the leper close, not pulling away, not afraid, not disgusted, just present, just loving, just human. When they finally separated, Francis reached into his pocket and gave the leper what little money he had. But the money didn't matter. What mattered was the touch. What mattered was the kiss. What mattered was that someone had seen him, had chosen him, had loved him. The leper blessed Francis and continued on his way, the bell ringing softly as he disappeared down the road. Francis stood there, trembling, but not from fear anymore, from something else, from the realization that he was free. The fear that had controlled him for so long was gone. He had faced it. He had walked into it, and it had transformed into love. He mounted his horse, his hands still shaking, but his heart completely changed. And as he rode back toward Assisi, he turned to look one last time at the leper walking away. But the road was empty. The leper was gone, vanished. Francis later told his brothers that he believed it wasn't just a leper he had kissed that day. It was Christ himself. He said that God often comes to us disguised as the thing we fear most, because that's where we need him most. The leper on the road wasn't just a test. He was a gift, a chance for Francis to become who he was meant to be. After that day, everything changed. Francis didn't just tolerate lepers, he sought them out. He went to the leper colonies regularly. He brought them food, medicine, comfort. He washed their wounds. He sat with them. He called them brothers. He treated them not as objects of pity, but as equals, as friends, as beloved children of God. The thing he had once run from became the center of his ministry. His followers were shocked at first. When the first men joined Francis, when Bernard and Pietro and Giles came to live with him in poverty, he took them to the leper colony. He told them, "If you want to follow Christ, this is where you start. Not in a monastery, not in a church. Here, with the forgotten, with the rejected, with the ones everyone else refuses to love." Some of them struggled. Some of them felt the same revulsion Francis had once felt. But Francis would tell them about that day on the road, about the moment he kissed the leper's hand and felt his soul transform. He would say, "The disease is not the leper. The disease is our fear, and the only cure is love." He taught his brothers that serving lepers wasn't charity. It was privilege. It was the chance to meet Christ in the flesh. Francis also understood something profound about fear. He realized that whatever we run from has power over us. Whatever we refuse to face controls us. The lepers had controlled him for years, not because they had any power, but because his fear gave them power. And the moment he stopped running, The moment he turned and walked toward the thing that terrified him, he took that power back. Or rather, he gave it to God. He would tell people, "Your greatest fear is often your greatest calling, because God hides the deepest grace in the place you least want to go." For Francis, that place was the leper colony. For others, it might be something different, a conversation they're avoiding, a forgiveness they're withholding, a truth they're running from. But the principle is the same. Freedom is on the other side of fear. There's another layer to this story that Francis only understood later. He realized that he wasn't just afraid of lepers because of their disease. He was afraid of what they represented: mortality, suffering, decay. The reality that bodies break down, that beauty fades, that everyone, including him, will one day face death. The lepers were a mirror. They showed him what he would rather not see: that life is fragile, that control is an illusion, that we are all, in the end, dependent on mercy. When Francis kissed the leper's hand, he wasn't just overcoming disgust. He was accepting his own humanity, his own weakness, his own mortality. He was saying yes to the reality that all flesh is grass, that we are dust, and to dust we will return, and that the only thing that survives is love. The lepers taught him that. They became his greatest teachers. In his final years, when Francis's own body was breaking down, when he was nearly blind, when he suffered constant pain, he often thought about that moment on the road. He told his brothers that he understood now why God had led him to the lepers first, because they prepared him for his own suffering. They taught him that holiness isn't found in strength or beauty or health. It's found in surrendering everything, even the body, even comfort, even dignity, to the love of God. Francis said that the day he kissed the leper was the day he truly became free. Free from fear, free from the need to control, free from the illusion that he could protect himself from suffering. He learned that the only real protection is love. And love doesn't avoid the broken. It runs toward them. There's a beautiful detail recorded by Brother Leo, Francis's closest companion. He said that in his later years, Francis would sometimes weep when he thought about the lepers, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. He would say, "They saved me. I thought I was saving them, but they saved me. They showed me who Christ is. They showed me who I am. They showed me that there is no fear in love." The moment on that road, the moment Francis stopped running and walked toward his greatest fear, became the hinge on which his entire life turned. It was the moment his soul was transformed, not by a vision, not by a voice, but by a choice. The choice to love when everything in him wanted to run. The choice to embrace when everything in him wanted to recoil. The choice to see Christ in the face of the person society had declared worthless. Saint Francis of Assisi faced his greatest fear on a dusty road outside Assisi. And what happened next didn't just change him, it changed the world. Because the man who kissed the leper became the man who could love anyone, who could embrace poverty without bitterness, who could suffer without complaint, who could see beauty in everything, even in decay, even in death, even in the cross. And it all began with one kiss, one moment of courage, one decision to stop running and start loving. That's the moment Francis's soul was transformed. That's the moment he became a saint.